Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope your day has gotten off to a great start so far. I'm your host, Tyler McBlevins, and in today's episode, we're going to be learning about a massive issue that was during the 1900s that had people at their very lowest because their happiness was quickly tapering away, and depression never seemed to fade. Yeah, that's right. We're going to be going over the Great Depression in this episode and how to survive. Why the Great Depression, you might be asking? Well, although the Great Depression is an event that already happened, it's still something that can very well happen again, and we must be prepared for. In order to survive during this time, people had to get really creative and crafty with meals and other living essentials just to get by because they weren't earning the same amount of money they used to. Many of these strategies that I'm going to be going over today were used during this time because it was very economically unstable and difficult for general families to get by. The first strategy that we'll be going over in today's episode is gardening. Gardening was used by many during the Great Depression because not only was it a good and reliable source of fruits and vegetables, which during a time like the Great Depression, it was much harder to attain these goods, but you could also sell your harvest to people neighboring you or your neighbors just for a little bit of extra income, which would definitely help. To start, many people who used this strategy back in the day used to live on a farm, but I know that's probably not your case, and so what I recommend you do is start your garden in a backyard that you own, or you with your community, you can set up a community garden in your local park within your neighborhood. And to start, you'll have to go and buy your own seeds from a nearby market, and ideally you'll want to choose a good selection of fruits and vegetables because often during the Great Depression, many families would eat the same meal multiple times per day and for multiple days out of the week. And in order to counteract this, we want to get as many recipes as possible so that we can create as many meals as possible and so we don't have to be as repetitive, which will definitely help. After getting the seeds, you'll want to figure out exactly how you want to position your garden. Now, with modern technology, we actually have things like vertical gardens, which allow us to exponentially increase the amount of harvest we can get. But if you don't have one of those, or if you can't afford it during this time, a very popular strategy during the Great Depression was to actually have the garden around your entire house, which includes not only your front yard, but your backyard and whatever land you have in between, if it's available. And after you plant your seeds, you still have a lot of work to do. Keeping these seeds alive, depending on the plant, will not be very easy, and they'll require a lot of attention and care, things like watering them and making sure you put them in enough sunlight for them to grow. And each seed will have their own needs, and so you have to make sure that you tend to them and you know what they are. Once your crops have grown, you can enjoy them or sell them to others who may also need them, because during a time like the Great Depression, it's not only you that's suffering, but there's also pretty much the entire country, and even more than that, that are also going through the same thing as you. And during the Great Depression, many farmers actually would sell their crops for extra cash because they needed to pay extra taxes on their properties and their farms. And so that's one way to survive the Great Depression. So this next method kind of goes hand in hand with the other one we just mentioned. If you want to survive the Great Depression, you're going to need to get crafty with your recipes so that you can stretch your budget for as long as possible. I say this strategy goes hand in hand with the previous one because it really relies on you having that garden to be able to provide for yourself. So once again, to start, you're going to need a garden that's already producing results. And once you have that, after your latest harvest, you're going to use your fruits and vegetables for a variety of meals. A common practice for people who lived on farms in the Great Depression was to feed their livestock things like the stems and skins of fruits and vegetables that they normally would usually eat. And some other requirements are also going to be that you have appliances like an oven for things like pies, a stovetop for pastas, eggs, and even soups, and as well as a toaster so that you can make yourself some toast. And using only these three appliances, you can cook a multitude of recipes using only the produce you make from your garden, which is very common during the Great Depression. If possible, you can also buy certain ingredients from the market Things like flour, sugar, salt, coffee, baking soda, and baking powder, and bread were very common and very popular purchases from the market during this era and would be useful in our current age as well. Some common recipes used from the Great Depression include a variety of soups, which were usually made from leftovers of different meals. Some examples include burger soup, rice and chicken soup, and things like eggs and toast were also eaten for breakfast. Veggie salads, meatloaf, and many other recipes using your crops and the limited appliances available to you were used during the Great Depression. And if you don't have the appliances, you could also use some of the appliances that your neighbors have, if possible, if you're not able to afford one, which was also a common occurrence during the Great Depression. In the grand scope of things, however, cooking in the Great Depression came down to using whatever resources you had to feed yourself and your family. And now for these next couple of tips, I actually brought along a special guest who is actually an expert on the Great Depression, and she's going to be going over health and education during the years of this era. I welcome Kylie Samat.
Hey Tyler, thanks for having me on. It's such a pleasure. So, it was no surprise that health in the Great Depression was not too well. It had less to do with normal illnesses such as the flu and chickenpox and more to do with hygienic ones. It's no secret that the economy was doing horribly, but for some family it was even worse, and the illnesses were food poisoning, allergic reactions, and stomach flus due to not being able to afford a refrigerator for the food and it being spoiled. Things were even worse since there was hardly any access to medical care. Here are some tips for you which might seem a little obvious, but going for the inexpensive food that does not need to be refrigerated, such as potatoes, bread, corn, pasta, and others are very helpful. This almost entirely prevents the illnesses I mentioned earlier. One other super helpful tip that is also super obvious, but very overlooked, is making sure that all foods, such as fruits and vegetables, are being washed and cleaned to prevent any other bacterial infections, which I know is super simple and obvious, but you'd definitely be surprised how many people did not do it. Okay, now next up we have education. During the Great Depression, it wasn't very often that kids went to school. It was a hard time economically. There was many alternative classes being cut, such as music, PE, and other electives, since there was budgetary cuts. Most teachers lost their jobs, and the ones who did not lost 50% of their pay. The only education they had were alternative learning methods, vocational training, and jobs. I believe that if this situation were to occur again, the best alternative method to keep your children with a strong education is homeschooling. It is a method that can keep your children up to date with their learning and not have to suffer the consequences of the economy.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that about wraps it up for today's episode. I hope that you learned something new today, even if we don't ever have to use these strategies for a situation like this. Hopefully we never do. But either way, it was kind of fun learning about how people back in the 30s survived and got by until the economy went back to normal. I, for one, really liked how they used their own crops to survive and now I want a garden. But anyways, I hope everyone enjoys and has a great rest of their day, and I'll see you next time.